The Echo Chamber, brought to you by the Holmes Report and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers. Sponsored by the Bullet Group, putting you in tomorrow's conversations today.
Hello and welcome to the Echo Chamber. I am Diana Marszalek. I'm a senior reporter with the Holmes Report, and I'm here to talk Super Bowl with three fans. We have Jim Joseph, who is BCW's global president. I have Bret Werner, who is president of MWWPR, and Jason Teitler, who is chair of BCW's Fan Experience. Hello.
Hi there.
Hello, how are you?
So we're here to talk about everything from what went on the field to the marketing, and don't like to start on a down note, but I'm not hearing a whole lot of love from people out there. What was your takeaway?
Well, I think in a year where the NFL experienced increased ratings, a lot of scoring, people were anticipating the shootout, and obviously it was the lowest scoring Super Bowl of all time. Looks like ratings hit a 10-year low. But overall, it was a great year for the NFL, but probably wanted a little bit more of a high-octane experience.
Yeah, and then, of course, the ads are always a big show. And, Jim, I know you have a Twitter party, and you follow it closely and what people are saying. So what is your takeaway from last night?
I do. Every year I have a Twitter party, so I get kind of first-hand accounts of how people are feeling and what they're reacting to. And every year people complain about how horrible the advertising is and there's no creativity. And I never buy into that. I'm actually very positive about it. But I will say this year sort of lacked a little of the pomp and circumstance. Like it lacked a little of the celebratory nature of past year's Super Bowl advertising. But there were some highlights that we'll talk about for sure.
Okay. Jason?
I thought the Super Bowl was a little bit disjointed, but what I find very encouraging is that the NFL and pro football in general does have an opportunity to really sync up with younger fans, and I look forward to seeing how the NFL is able to embrace that potential, especially with both millennials and centennials.
Well, I'm interested, Jim, in what you said about the lacking of the pomp and circumstance. So do you think that was the advertisers reacting to football, to the game, what they want, or was that sort of the mood of the country? I mean, usually you have at least one or two big ads that people are talking about the next day, and I'm not quite sure that there was one yesterday.
I think that's exactly right. There was nothing epic. There was nothing like this huge surprise, either from a social statement or even if you remember last year's Tide ad, which just lived on and on. I mean, it was epic. It was of the occasion. And there really wasn't anything this year that was of the occasion. And I think it's a number of things. One is we know from data and from research that consumers, watchers of the Super Bowl, they didn't want to get hit with heavy political messages. And I think the brands knew that. So for the most part, they stayed away from that. They want to be entertained. They want to think about social issues. They want purpose, for sure, but they want it to be lighthearted. So I think we saw maybe an overreaction. And a lot of the advertising felt like it could be advertising that would run on anything, not necessarily the Super Bowl.
Right, because you're saying they weren't looking for these elements, and yet now today everybody's bitching and moaning about it.
That they want them, right, exactly.
And we have two people here. Bret and Jason, you were on the ground to some degree. So what was that like? Is that different? I mean, obviously it's different than us watching at home, but there were probably a lot of things going on in the marketing world there on the ground that we do not know watching in our living rooms.
Yeah, I think Atlanta was my 21st Super Bowl, and I believe if you're going to win the marketing war around Super Bowl, it's not just the Super Bowl ad. It starts the weeks leading into it, and it continues today. Monday is probably the deadest day in sports, and that social conversation remains very heavy today. So you can't look at it as a 30-second spot. You have to look at it, how did I activate before and after? And a lot of brands were winning before they even aired that commercial on linear TV. So I think that's a key part of the equation that some brands really underleveraged, in my view, including this year.
But they're activating on the ground in Atlanta, or are you talking about different platforms, social, whatever it is that they're...
I think it's all of the above. It could be in Atlanta. There's thousands of credentialed media there, but it's a social platform. You're talking about the epicenter of culture during this week and how you're going to activate that on a national, perhaps global stage. And if there's not an element of digital, I don't know how you really win there, too. And I think it continues even the day after. A good plan sort of surrounds the Super Bowl on bookends, and your TV spot, if maybe you didn't even have one, is sort of just an apex of it.
And Jason, you come with research. So was what we saw yesterday in line with what you had heard before about what fans want, and what do they want, or say that they want?
Yes and no. I do think that there are many brands out there, whether they're sponsors or non-sponsors, advertisers or non-advertisers, that still need to understand what the younger audience is looking for around the Super Bowl. And Brett's absolutely right. You have to diversify your portfolio if you're a brand that's trying to take advantage of that space. What a lot of people don't realize, it's the biggest media gathering in the world every year, or at least one of the biggest in the world. It's definitely the biggest in the U.S. And from a younger audience standpoint, they are really looking for different things that the older generation is looking for out of the Super Bowl. For instance, a lot of younger fans are looking for an international Super Bowl. That's something that should be discussed by the NFL. There might be some opportunities there. Gambling, because it's becoming so much more of a legal pastime, is something that I think the NFL needs to look at, and how do certain brands and sponsors and non-sponsors embrace that as a way to tell their story. In the past, it's been taboo, but it's not any longer. Esports is another thing that came out in our survey that younger fans are looking for as far as an alternative way to experience the Super Bowl. So the halftime show is losing not only a bit of its luster, but also its appeal to audiences that are not just younger, but are getting progressively older. So how does esports play into this? Is there an alternative type of halftime show that we offer a younger audience, in addition to keeping them more traditional for those that are just used to that and grew up with that? So I think there are a variety of different dimensions that brands need to recognize are opportunities for them, and that includes the NFL.
Well, it sounds like it's almost like you'd have to have two polar different experiences going on. You have to have whoever is singing for the halftime show, and then some esports, whatever that is, online, and the NFL, though, in particular, is so centered around live TV, right? So they still have to maximize that. That's their bread and butter.
That's true. I do think the NFL does get a bad rap when people start questioning the interest in the NFL because of folks that are coming into the stadium, and maybe the lack of people, based on previous years, because they are diversifying their portfolio as well. I mean, there are ways to consume NFL content in a variety of ways. So social media is certainly one of them. We talked about gambling and esports as opportunities for them. And because people may not be coming to the stadium, it doesn't mean that they're not experiencing the NFL. I think we need to recognize that. I think brands need to embrace that and need to adjust their marketing strategies, both on-site and off-site, to accommodate a new type of mindset.
Gambling interests me. Do you think brands would ever touch gambling, and how could they do it without, I don't know, starting a fire, storm of something?
Oh, I absolutely think they can. It's legal in many states, and there's different forms of it. What I was fascinated by this year is the nuances. I mean, you could bet on what color Gatorade was going to be thrown on the winning coach, how long the national anthem was going to take, what the first score would be. I mean, you can really get into the details of the game from a gambling perspective, and you're gambling against your friends, and I mean, that's how you get in like full participation rather than just passive viewership. So I can see brands embracing that.
I totally agree. I mean, you're seeing from the interactive experience, if it's linear or digital, broadcast being built for gambling, so providing the information, the insights to their new leagues, the Alliance, which is a new spring football league kicking off this coming weekend. They're leaning into it. If you're talking about engagement, and at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about, how you're going to engage that consumer, and that's an avenue. So I think if you have the right brand, you can lean into that.
And this is one day, right? I mean, these are lessons learned or takeaways for all brands for the entire football season, basketball season, baseball season, whatever it is. This is not unique to the Super Bowl. It's just that there's so much attention on the Super Bowl.
Or any kind of live event, quite honestly. Yep. I mean, it's like good participatory marketing during a live television broadcast event. It could be the Grammys, it could be the Oscars, it could be anything. Yep.
And they hold water cooler conversation and TV ratings. We see time and time again, the live events still capture audiences.
So the survey that we put out this year is our 6th annual Super Bowl survey. It's a BCW survey in partnership with PSB, has told us that millennials are very open to gambling. And I think that's something that brands need to listen to very loud and clear, because what we heard is that 67% of millennials are likely to bet on the Super Bowl over any other sporting event, but they're also betting on other sporting events, and to the points that were just mentioned, on entertainment properties as well. Millennials are also excited about betting in general, as 52% would travel to a place to bet. So think about the appetite for gambling and the fact that they'll actually move from one place to the other to place a bet. So there's a lot of hunger there, and now that it is legal, why not take advantage of it? Again, for the right brand, of course.
It also seems like there's a question here, and is the NFL driving the brands or the brand driving the NFL and the way all this takes shapes and go, or does it really have to be a partnership? It's really bigger than just one entity.
It is a partnership, and I think sports leagues, but even in the world of entertainment, you see it is when there is that true partnership, they can make magic happen because they need each other, right? So it's really interesting, especially in this day and age where everyone's fighting over eyeballs and their new mediums, how you make that work. But I do think the NFL is one of the best at it.
All right, did anybody have any fun last night? Let's hear what your favorite, anybody have a favorite ad or takeaway or think somebody did something well, or what did you hear in your Twitter party, Jim?
Well, what I heard on the Twitter party pretty overwhelmingly is that the NFL itself was the most loved spot. The 100th anniversary, 100th season, that very long spot that aired about mid-game, by far was voted the best ad. I don't know that I would count that because it's the NFL promoting itself, but that counts, I guess. In all reality, it is a brand. But that was a clear winner. For me, the Microsoft ad was the clear winner. The gaming spot where they have consoles that help folks with disabilities and with mobility issues play games. And the tagline alone for me was it. You know, when everybody plays, everybody wins.
I thought that was amazing too.
When
just
everybody
the way
plays, we all win.
Equalizing the kids around a video game, and it was simple. There was no gimmick there. They just interviewed the kids.
And what I thought was amazing is, you know, there's enough commentary and even controversy around how much should children be gaming, and is it good for them to be gaming? And that whole piece just erased that.
Absolutely.
You know, to see the social acceptance and the inclusion and the sociability of gaming just wipe that conversation right off.
I agree. It's the one that had, like, it just touches you in your heart. And it was when they said it really is equalizing. It really is all inclusive. Yep.
We all win.
Anybody else have any thoughts on what they saw yesterday?
I did like the NFL ad a lot. I thought it was, first of all, to pull off that shoot, I think they did it in 3 days in Los Angeles was impressive. But here's what I really liked what the NFL did. Yes, it was great content in my view, but you had Ninja in there, right? So you're appealing to a younger demographic. There are 3 women who contribute to the sport of football on the field. They were part of it. So in a nice, light way, I think they touched on a lot of different audiences. You got your hardcore fan. You got maybe some new emerging people. Very well done, in my opinion. And I agree with Jim. I think Microsoft did a good job. You know, at MWW, we believe a lot in this consumer sort of philosophy that, you know, consumers truly care how corporations are contributing to society. And you look at Microsoft, you look at Google, I thought they both did a good job of walking that line and leaning into it. I thought it was real interesting how these technology companies and a lot of the OTT channels are leaning into linear TV and sort of dominating the conversation. So I really liked what Google and Microsoft did.
Yeah, but purpose was not overt necessarily. I mean, those said what they had to say, but none of it was kind of in your face this year. There were no political ads, like, as you said. There were no overt sort of purpose ads that really shoved it at you.
No, in fact, I think if anything, a lot of the advertising was very grounded in the products. We heard a lot of product attribute advertising for the first time in a while. And even one of my other favorites was the Bud Light corn syrup spot. That was basically a product message. It was done very creatively. It was done very competitively. I mean, it's hard to do a spot that attacks your competitors and not come off like you're being shady. And they did a brilliant job, but it was a product message. It wasn't a brand message. And it got people thinking about, I mean, I remember I even asked my Twitter party, like, should we care about this? And I got an avalanche of comments back saying, yeah, this is why it matters. And to Bret's point earlier, that social conversation is continuing today because now the corn manufacturer is speaking up and saying their point of view. I mean, that's Super Bowl advertising. That is actually what you want to do.
Right. It's got legs, right? It keeps going.
Right.
It keeps going.
So I like the NFL 100 commercial as well. So I guess that's 3 of us that really liked it, maybe 4.
I liked it 4.
Yeah. And I agree. I think the NFL did a fantastic job of not being clumsy in introducing some of these other generations to football and closing the bridge between the older generation, because you had newer players, you had obviously a lot of Hall of Famers, and as Bret mentioned, there are a lot of other attributes they touched. I like the Budweiser wind turbine spot, and the reason I liked it is because a lot of people saw a little bit of a nostalgic feel, and seeing the Clydesdales go down the path, and it was like, okay, here's another traditional Budweiser commercial for the corporation, but you got Bob Dylan playing in the background. Okay, there's something going on there. All of a sudden, you see those turbines, and there is a little bit of purpose in that, and I thought that was a nice touch. For pure entertainment, I thought the bubbly one was kind of funny, because Bublé sitting there and scratching off, bubbly for Bublé. It was pure entertainment. It was nice. It wasn't totally in your face and forced. I thought that was a nice touch.
Entertainment's always good, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's what you're turning
is.
on the TV on for. Do you think things were muted because there's a fear going on now? I mean, nobody wants to say anything controversial. Was it a couple years ago or last year that we had the Dodge Ram ad that created a problem? There's the wall. I mean, everything is so kind of volatile now that I wonder if that was part of it, or if it just was sort of a meh year.
I don't think brands are afraid to take a stand, and I don't think they're afraid to come out with a message. Look at what Gillette did just 2 weeks ago. So I don't think they're afraid. I think they're cautious. I think they're careful. They're making sure that they're representative of their consumer base. I honestly think that in many cases, brands just realize that the Super Bowl may not be the platform for it anymore. It used to be the place where you actually made a statement like that because you had this huge viewership. And I think this year in particular, and it might bounce back next year, but I think this year in particular, brands just realize that consumers don't want to hear that in that moment. It's a family event. It's a fun event. You're with your family. You're with your friends. Just make it light and entertaining. And I think they dialed back.
I build on what Jim's saying. I do agree that understand the environment. It's Sunday. It's fun. It's light. Also, a lot of the conversation throughout the season stayed on the field when it came to the NFL. So it was good that perhaps it stayed there this year. So I think you have to understand your environment, not just from a macro standpoint, but as a marketing through this particular channel, what's going on there in that ecosystem. I agree, though. I think brands are ready to challenge, but they have to pick the right sort of channel and the right time.
I think it's important to recognize, too, that the environment is well beyond just the advertising platform. I think we mentioned it earlier that if a brand is going to make a lot of traction within the Super Bowl environment, they need to understand all the different mechanisms that they could deploy in order to get a particular message out there. And sometimes advertising is not the way to do it. Having a 30 or 60-second spot is not necessarily the best way to project a particular narrative. So, for instance, we do a lot of work at BCW with Special Olympics. They were there in a very big way. They just didn't have a commercial. And that's okay, because through our survey, we found that a lot of people actually are not as interested in the commercials as a lot of people think. They're more interested in the game, which was refreshing to see, because after all, it is a game. Although yesterday's game was, we'll leave that for another time. So there is the media environment, and Bret and I were both on Radio Row with representing certain brands, talking about a variety of different narratives, because you certainly have more than 30 or 60 seconds to talk when you're speaking with a whole variety of media outlets. In our case, we were working with United Airlines, talking about what they're doing with Special Olympics and what they're doing with employees to make the experience for those with intellectual disabilities much more enjoyable. And I think that's something to consider. Brands need to think about what other avenues can I go down to tell my story. It's not only putting millions and millions of dollars into a particular spot.
So what for the Special Olympics, for instance, what were you doing? What was there getting the word out? What were you doing besides being on the radio?
It was both media relations as well as social engagement, and they both fed into each other. So we brought a Special Olympics athlete who is a fantastic ambassador for the Special Olympics movement and a great ambassador for those with intellectual disabilities, and partnered her up with Hall of Famer Brian Urlacher, with United Airlines, and then simultaneously we had a pure Special Olympics tour talking about the World Games in Abu Dhabi. And we found that, through our research, that the younger audience are very interested in a lot of this purpose-based type of storytelling, and it gave us an opportunity to project that to heights that, mostly have been unknown to a lot of individuals when it comes to Special Olympics and intellectual disability. So it got a tremendous amount of traction. One hit in particular with Golic and Wingo was very emotional. Trey Wingo told the audience
Tears,
about...
right?
What's that?
He cried on
Yeah,
it.
he did. So you saw that one.
Yeah.
It went super viral. I think it was close to a million people actually viewed the video after people actually heard it and saw it through traditional channels. And that's the power of the Super Bowl, to be able to tell stories that people don't normally hear, and especially not through advertising, with a lot of texture. And brands need to recognize that that's an opportunity.
And Bret, you were on the ground too with brands.
I was, and I'll continue to say, as odd as it sounds, the Super Bowl and other big platforms, be it Davos, be it the Grammys, they're under leveraged in my view, especially to probably the audience that's listening from a PR and a digital and a social standpoint too. These are huge platforms that need activation to bring them to life and to integrate into the conversation. We know TV viewership is declining. The Super Bowl is obviously an exception to that. But where is the communications plan building into these events? And that's where brands, I think, still have room to be more assertive.
And Jim, you have your ad. Your event is focused around the ads, obviously. But do you see a lot of the brands? Do you follow their other activations surrounding their ads, or
absolutely. And even the brands that are telling a Super Bowl story, but not necessarily at the Super Bowl. So the big one this year was Skittles. They did a Broadway show in lieu of Super Bowl advertising, a legitimate Broadway show with a writer, director, all-star cast, choreography. It was evidently really fabulously reviewed. They got a lot of play out of it. They're doing a lot of social play out of it. I have a feeling we're going to see a lot of that content start to pop up if they're smart. That was a brilliant way to be a part of the Super Bowl, not just advertise, not take the risk that a 30-second spot isn't going to produce the kind of results you want, but actually get a much larger activation out of it. And there were a number of brands that did similar things off of the actual Super Bowl platform itself, but still surrounding it through social media, through activations. They're still the Puppy Bowl, and they had the National Geographic did that thing with owls. I mean, it's pretty cool stuff.
Do you think we'll see more of that? Do you think brands will start reconsidering doing Super Bowl ads?
I think that is always a consideration every year. I think they reconsider it every time, and they go through the process of understanding if it's worth the investment. I don't think they'll necessarily, in the next few years anyway, walk away from the advertising, but I think they're going to think more and more about do they need that spot? Can they do other things with it? Can they do other things around it? And I think we're going to see a lot of the other channels, like a YouTube, start to get more and more involved. I thought it was amazing that YouTube sponsored the pregame show to try to drive subscriptions to their streaming TV service. We're going to see more of those kinds of brands. Hulu, HBO.
They were all on there. Amazon Prime,
the
Netflix.
OTTs were all over that.
Which is amazing because you're still leveraging traditional TV to drive to streaming, but an ad's an ad, right? It's a Super Bowl ad.
Yeah, I even saw DAZN on Radio Row. I don't know if you saw them, Brett, but they were there in a big way. And as the competition heats up between the Netflixes and is that a word? Sure. And the Hulus, and Hulu obviously being part owned by Disney, they're going to be much more smash mouth, and I think they're going to use the Super Bowl as a mechanism to elevate their message. But you mentioned Skittles. They're a good example of a brand that does diversify because they were on Radio Row as well, talking with media about their product, and it was nice to see that some brands understand the diversity of a portfolio when it comes to the Super Bowl.
And then there was the HBO mashup with the beer ad and the HBO and Game of Thrones. That was kind of fun.
Yep. That was fabulous, and I think actually we'll start to see more of those kinds of partnerships, if you will. Budweiser has used the Dilly Dilly style campaign for quite some time, which obviously is a homage, so we say, to Game of Thrones. To suddenly see them embrace each other and have a bit of a storyline around it was fabulous. Like, great entertainment, great head nodder. I don't know if it's going to drive any more viewership of Game of Thrones. They're pretty much off the charts already. But it just puts Budweiser in the same sort of context as that kind of level of entertainment.
Well, and it was the one ad that was kind of groundbreaking in its creativity or in its novelty, I guess, is what I'm thinking of, more or less. Now, the NFL has its own marketing issues that they're going to be looking for the next next year. I've got between ratings and the national anthem, the pro take a knee movement. They've got to have a tough year cut out for them as well.
Oh, I don't know. I think the NFL did a really good job this year. They have a new CMO in place. They've made a lot of progress. The discussion when I was in Atlanta was pretty much of issues on the field, which I think is good. Mm-hmm. TV ratings were up this year. They're going into their 100th anniversary. You still have the greats like Tom Brady. You have a group of young athletes that are interesting. Although the Rams didn't come out on top, big market team that's going to be good for a while. If I'm the NFL, I'm pretty bullish, actually.
Okay, good. Shame on me.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I think they have some interesting opportunities to kick around, which presents some challenges too, because we know there's a hunger for the Super Bowl in international markets. You know, to think about what does the UK mean to the NFL and the Super Bowl. We know that there are games played there on a regular basis. Same thing with Mexico and other markets. We found that countries like Brazil were actually there on site. ESPN Brazil was doing some broadcasting, which is kind of interesting. And then you got other groups to consider as well. ESPN Deportes had a big presence as well. So international is something I think the NFL needs to think about very long and hard, because there are opportunities there. It's just a matter of how do you cater to an audience that's very hungry for it, while also being very practical on how you run your league, because, listen, time zones are a very real issue. But there's a hunger for it, because we know that over 50% of fans are interested in an international Super Bowl. What do you do with that? And millennials, over 70%, are interested in an international Super Bowl. So while there might be logistic challenges, there are also audience desires that will be there regardless. So if you don't cater to them, then you could potentially be losing a large chunk of your audience, particularly the younger audience.
I also think that they're sitting on a humongous opportunity, more so than any other sport, maybe the World Cup, but any other sport, to go beyond just the game. It was what Bret and Jason were talking about earlier, but folding in a total experience that's very social. And I don't mean social like physically sitting on a couch and watching the game together, but like, virtually social, where you're betting and you're projecting and you're gamifying with each other. I was sitting at home with my son, and he was probably with 12 friends who were not in the room with us, but we were all going back and forth and talking about the betting and the gaming, and if they can embrace that and figure out how really to sort of authentically systematize it so that it's not just the game, it's actually the whole ecosystem, they're sitting on a huge opportunity. I think probably more so than other sports.
Why so?
I think it's just much more ubiquitous. Mm-hmm. It's much more ingrained in culture. It's not that baseball couldn't do it, but I think football would have an easier time of doing it.
Right. So one last question. If we're sitting here next year, three of us are sitting back and going to do the same podcast next year, is that what we're going to be seeing? Are they up to the task, or where are we going to be at?
I think we're going to see a return next year to brands talking more social issues. We're going to be going into an election year shortly thereafter. I think we're going to see a swing back to more heavy purpose communication, more heavy social issues, maybe not taking a political stand per se, although we could see that, but a swing back to the social issues. And I also think we're going to see a reaction with higher production values than we saw this year.
Anybody else?
Well, it's a market that's probably one of the most international markets in the U.S., and that's Miami. So I think because of the cultural melting pot that we have down there, it may be a great opportunity for the NFL to think about how do we understand and leverage the hunger for more international types of experiences, content through the NFL, based on the fact that it is in Miami. So they have an opportunity to really embrace it and run with it, and I'd love to see them do so.
Yeah, I agree. I think the tone may be a little bit different. You're going to have the largest single-day platform on the eve of election. I think you're going to start to see more appeal to some different audiences, so more appeal to that younger demographic, make sure that football fan is continuing. And we saw some of it this year, but we need to see more female voices. We saw that in a lot of the spots. We need more of that progress, but not where we need to be.
And will we see the Patriots again?
I'm a Bronco fan, but it's hard to bet against them.
I grew up on the Rams, so I was happy to see them in there.
Maybe number 7. Who knows?
All right, everybody. Well, I appreciate your time and coming in, and we'll meet here again this time next year.
Great. Thank
Sounds
you.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
You've been listening to The Echo Chamber. Brought to you by The Holmes Report and produced by Marketeers. Sponsored by the Bullet Group, putting you in tomorrow's conversations today.